Hidden away in the dusty attic of the Montgomery estate, a girl without sight possessed a scent that could bring an empire to its knees. She was her family's darkest secret, a blind anomaly in a bloodline of perfect predators, completely unaware that a king was already hunting for her. Bloodlines meant everything in the hidden society of wolves. For Richard and Victoria Montgomery, alphas of the prestigious Silver Pines pack in the dense, rainy forests of Washington state, perfection was not just an expectation. It was a ruthless requirement. They were a family of politicians and warriors, projecting an image of flawless genetic superiority to the rest of the werewolf world. That flawless image was the exact reason Clara existed strictly as a ghost. Born blind, with milky, unseeing eyes that reflected no moonlight, Clara was an omega. In a pack that prided itself on producing giant, aggressive alpha males and cunning beta females, an omega was rare enough to draw attention. A defective omega, however, was a profound political liability. Instead of seeking medical help or embracing their daughter, Richard and Victoria erased her. From the age of 4, Clara was confined to the sprawling, forgotten east wing of the Montgomery Manor. There were no photographs of her in the grand hallways. Her name was never spoken at dinner parties. To the outside world, the Montgomerys had only one daughter, the golden, fierce, and stunningly beautiful Isabella. Clara's world was entirely sensory, built on the heavy thrum of rain against her reinforced window panes, the scent of damp pine needles, and the chilling, sharp smell of antiseptic. The antiseptic always preceded the needle. "Hold your arm out, Clara," Beatrice, the elderly pack nurse, muttered. Beatrice's voice was like dry leaves scraping across pavement, devoid of warmth, functioning only on duty. Clara complied, extending a pale, slender arm that rarely saw the sun. A sharp pinch followed, as the thick, burning liquid was pushed into her veins. It was a potent, illegal concoction of wolfsbane and synthetic hormones designed to completely mask her natural scent. An omega's scent was intoxicating, meant to draw protectors and mates. For Clara, it was a death sentence to her family's reputation. If anyone discovered they were hoarding a blind omega, the scandal would strip Richard of his alpha status. "It burns more today, Beatrice," Clara whispered, her voice a soft, melodic rasp from years of disuse. "Your biology is fighting it. You just turned 21. The omega nature is trying to present," Beatrice replied, swiftly packing her medical bag. "Keep your window locked. Keep the heavy curtains drawn. Your father is hosting the regional summit tonight. The estate will be swarming with foreign wolves." Clara nodded, pulling her knitted shawl tighter around her shoulders. She didn't need eyes to know what the summit meant. For months, the manor had smelled of frantic preparation, floor wax, expensive floral arrangements, and Victoria's nervous, sour sweat. King Alexander Sterling was arriving. Alexander was the sovereign of the North American territories, a man spoken of in terrified, hushed whispers even among alphas. He was rumored to be a massive, scarred beast of a man who ruled with absolute, uncompromising justice. But he was also 30 years old and mateless. The summit was merely a political smokescreen. In reality, it was a carefully orchestrated selection ball. Every alpha within 1,000 miles had brought their unwed daughters, and Victoria Montgomery had spent the last decade grooming Isabella specifically for this night. Isabella was to be the queen. It was practically considered a done deal. Downstairs, the grand ballroom was already vibrating with the heavy, booming bass of the orchestra and the overwhelming clash of aggressive wolf scents. Clara sat on the edge of her simple cot, listening to the vibrations traveling up the wooden bones of the manor. She ran her fingers over a small, braille book she had read 100 times, but she couldn't focus. Her blood felt unnaturally hot. A dull ache throbbed at the base of her spine. What Clara didn't know, and what Beatrice had failed to realize, was that a 21-year-old Omega's first heat cycle could not be suppressed by synthetic wolfsbane forever. The dam was cracking. In her isolation, Clara allowed herself a rare moment of bitter longing. She didn't want a crown. She didn't want a grand destiny. She just wanted to walk in the forest, barefoot, to feel the moss between her toes without the threat of being locked in the basement for weeks as punishment. She wanted someone to look at her unseeing eyes and not smell of pity or disgust. Just one night, Clara whispered to the empty room. Let them have their king. Let me just have peace. But fate, especially the primal, ancient magic of the mate bond, cared nothing for the plans of cruel parents or the quiet resignations of hidden daughters. Deep within Clara's biology, the suppressants finally fractured. A singular, crystalline drop of her true scent, like crushed vanilla orchids, rain-soaked earth, and sweet, wild honey, seeped through her pores and drifted out beneath the crack of her heavy oak door. It was a microscopic thread of fragrance in a massive house, but for a wolf of ancient lineage, it was louder than a gunshot. The grand ballroom of the Montgomery estate was a suffocating sea of ambition. King Alexander Sterling stood near the grand fireplace, a glass of untouched amber bourbon in his large, scarred hand. He was an imposing figure, standing 6'4", with shoulders broad enough to block out the light. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, but his piercing, icy blue eyes held the wild, untamed ferocity of an apex predator. He was incredibly, profoundly bored. She is quite spectacular, isn't she, my king? Richard Montgomery practically purred, gesturing grandly to the center of the dance floor. There, Isabella Montgomery was holding court. She was undeniably beautiful, with cascading blonde hair and a sleek, athletic build wrapped in a daring red silk gown. She moved with the calculated grace of a predator who knew exactly how to angle her neck to show submission while keeping her eyes boldly dominant. Alexander took a slow breath through his nose. Isabella smelled of expensive French perfume, heavily applied to mask the sharp, metallic tang of her ruthless ambition. She didn't smell like home. She didn't smell like peace. She smelled like every other power-hungry female who had been shoved into his path for the last 10 years. She is adequate, Alpha Montgomery, Alexander replied, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that offered no warmth. Richard's smile faltered slightly at the lukewarm praise. She is a fierce warrior, Victoria chimed in, desperately trying to salvage the moment. She led our border patrols last winter. She would make an exceptionally strong Luna for the kingdom. We pride ourselves on the flawlessness of our bloodline. Alexander's wolf, the massive, dark beast residing just beneath his skin, let out a restless growl in his mind. Lies, his wolf sneered. They all reek of lies and desperation. I will keep that in mind, Alexander said coldly, setting his glass on a passing waiter's tray. Excuse me. The air in here is overwhelmingly stagnant. Without waiting for permission, the king strode away from the sputtering Montgomery alphas. His beta and closest friend, Silas, fell into step beside him. Rough crowd? Silas murmured, amused. If I have to endure one more father trying to sell me his daughter like prized livestock, I'm going to shift and tear this manor down to the foundation, Alexander growled under his breath. He walked out into the grand foyer, seeking the heavy oak double doors leading to the gardens. He needed fresh air. He needed the scent of the rain. But as he crossed the marble entryway, an imperceptible draught swept down the grand staircase. Alexander froze. His boots halted abruptly on the marble. It was faint. So incredibly faint, it was barely a ghost of a fragrance. Vanilla orchids, Wet earth, wild honey. The moment the scent hit his olfactory receptors, the world tilted on its axis. The ambient noise of the ballroom faded into a dull buzz. The colors of the tapestries blurred. A violent, possessive roar echoed in his mind. Not his own voice, but the ancient, primal voice of his wolf. "Mate." Silas bumped into his back, startled by the sudden stop. "Alex? What is it? Threat?" Alexander didn't answer. He couldn't. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. His eyes flickered from their icy blue to a luminescent, glowing gold. He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding, chasing that singular thread of scent. It was cutting through the heavy musk of hundreds of wolves, fighting through layers of dust and time. It was pulling him toward the shadowed, unlit staircase of the east wing. "Alex, your eyes!" Silas hissed in warning, looking around to ensure no one had noticed the king's wolf rising so close to the surface. "Talk to me." "Mine," Alexander breathed, the word vibrating with a supernatural resonance. Before Silas could react, Alexander vaulted up the marble stairs, taking them 3 at a time. The scent was getting stronger, but beneath the intoxicating vanilla and honey, Alexander's heightened senses picked up something else. Something utterly repulsive. Wolf's bane. Chemical suppressants. Old blood. Rage, hot and blinding, began to mix with the overwhelming pull of the mate bond. Someone was poisoning his mate. Someone was trying to hide her. He reached the top landing, ignoring the velvet ropes meant to block off the east corridor. The hallway was dark, the carpet threadbare, a stark contrast to the opulent wealth displayed downstairs. Alexander moved like a hunting panther, silent and deadly, following the invisible trail of sweet honey and bitter chemicals. He arrived at a heavy oak door at the very end of the hall. It was locked from the outside with a heavy iron deadbolt, locked in, like a prisoner. The thought made Alexander's claws extend, slicing through the fine fabric of his tailored suit jacket. He didn't bother looking for a key. He gripped the iron deadbolt with his bare hand and violently wrenched it sideways. The metal shrieked and snapped under his monstrous strength. He kicked the door open. It slammed against the wall with a deafening crack. Inside the small, sparsely furnished room, Clara gasped, scrambling backward on her narrow cot. She pulled her knees to her chest, her heart racing in sheer terror. She couldn't see the intruder, but the scent that flooded her room was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was an overwhelming tidal wave of dark pine, crackling ozone, and masculine authority. It made her trembling body instinctively want to submit, yet simultaneously made her feel entirely, perfectly safe. "Who is there?" Clara stammered, her milky eyes wide, staring blindly in the direction of the doorway. "Beatrice, I didn't mean to make a sound, I swear." Alexander stood paralyzed in the doorway. The scent of vanilla and honey was overwhelming here, wrapping around his soul and tethering him permanently to the frail, trembling woman on the bed. He took in her appearance. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with delicate porcelain features and dark hair that cascaded in wild waves down her back, but she was painfully thin. She wore a faded, threadbare dress, and her eyes, they were a stunning, pale silver, devoid of focus. She was blind. A low, vibrating whimper escaped Clara's throat. The foreign alpha's presence was suffocating her small space. "Please, if my father finds you here, he will punish me. Please leave." Alexander stepped into the room, his golden eyes filled with a lethal mixture of sorrow for his mate and apocalyptic fury toward the family downstairs. He slowly fell to one knee beside the bed, making himself smaller, desperately trying to rein in his oppressive alpha aura so he wouldn't terrify her further. "I am not Beatrice," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a remarkably gentle, rumbling purr that he had never used in his entire life. He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering inches from her cheek before lightly grazing her jawline. Sparks of electricity, the undeniable physical proof of the mate bond, ignited where his skin met hers. Clara gasped, a shudder ripping through her spine. The pain of the suppressants vanished instantly, replaced by a rush of golden, warm energy. "Who are you?" she whispered, leaning subconsciously into his touch, her blind eyes wide with wonder. "I am Alexander," he murmured, his thumb brushing away a stray tear that had escaped her eye. "And your father is never going to punish you again, because you are my mate, and I am taking you home." The grand ballroom downstairs was a symphony of wealth and calculated political maneuvering. A string quartet played a lively waltz in the corner, while waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated with trays of expensive champagne. Isabella Montgomery laughed at a joke made by a visiting alpha, her eyes constantly darting toward the foyer, waiting for the king to return and finally claim her. Upstairs, a completely different reality was unfolding. Alexander gently wrapped his bespoke, tailored suit jacket around Clara's frail, trembling shoulders. The dark fabric completely engulfed her, enveloping her in his intoxicating scent of pine and ozone. For Clara, the sensation was a revelation. For 21 years, she had lived in a sensory void of coldness and chemical burns. Now she felt a radiant, crackling heat sinking into her bones, repairing the fractured pieces of her soul. "You are Alexander," she repeated softly, testing the syllables on her tongue. Her pale fingers reached out, blindly gripping the lapels of the jacket. "The king. But why are you here? My parents told me I was a monster, a stain on the bloodline." A lethal, vibrating growl ripped from Alexander's chest, so loud the floorboards beneath them shuddered. Clara flinched, instinctively pulling back, but Alexander immediately softened his posture, taking her small hands in his massive, scarred ones. "You are no monster, my beautiful mate," Alexander vowed, his golden eyes blazing in the dim light of the attic room. "You are a pure, uncorrupted Omega, and what they have done to you is the highest treason imaginable. Can you walk?" "I think so," Clara stammered. The suppressants usually left her weak and dizzy, but the proximity of her true mate was acting as a powerful biological catalyst. Her blood was singing, rushing through her veins and actively fighting the synthetic wolfsbane Beatrice had injected her with for years. "Hold on to me," he instructed gently. He didn't wait for her to stand. Instead, he effortlessly scooped her into his arms, lifting her against his broad chest as if she weighed no more than a feather. Clara gasped, wrapping her arms around his thick neck, her face buried against his warm throat. Silas stood in the hallway, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle ticked in his cheek. His beta instincts were screaming at the overwhelming scent of distress and toxins clinging to the hidden girl. "Alex, the entire regional summit is downstairs. If we walk down there with her—" "I want them all to see," Alexander interrupted, his voice a deadly, glacial calm. "I want every alpha in the North American territories to witness exactly what the flawless Montgomery bloodline truly is." With Clara secured against his heart, the Alpha King began his descent. Down in the ballroom, Richard Montgomery checked the heavy Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, a frown marring his handsome, aristocratic features. "Where did the king go? Isabella, did you say something to offend him?" "Of course not, father," Isabella snapped, smoothing the silk of her crimson dress. "He just needed air. Alphas of his power are notoriously temperamental. He will return for me." Just as the words left her mouth, the heavy, imposing presence of King Alexander washed over the room, It was not the restrained, polite aura he had arrived with. This was the suffocating, crushing pressure of a sovereign predator ready for war. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The cheerful chatter died instantly. A heavy, terrified silence fell over the 500 guests. All eyes turned to the grand marble staircase. Alexander stood at the top landing, holding a small, raggedly dressed woman wrapped in his jacket. Silas flanked him on the left, his hands resting dangerously close to the concealed silver blades at his hips. Victoria Montgomery dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the polished marble floor, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. All the color drained from Richard's face, leaving him looking like a polished corpse. "Who is that beggar he is holding?" Isabella hissed, taking a step forward, her claws extending reflexively from her manicured fingers. "What is the meaning of this?" Alexander descended the stairs slowly, deliberately, his heavy boots clicking rhythmically against the stone. With every step, his aura expanded, forcing weaker wolves to avert their eyes and bare their necks in submission. He walked straight into the center of the ballroom, stopping a few feet from the trembling Montgomery family. "Alpha Montgomery." Alexander's voice was a low, terrifying rumble that carried to every corner of the vast room. "Care to introduce us to this member of your household?" Richard swallowed hard, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. His political survival instincts kicked in, desperate to salvage the catastrophic situation. "My king, I apologize deeply. That is merely a sick servant. She is afflicted with madness and a highly contagious skin condition. We keep her quarantined in the East Wing for everyone's safety. You must put her down immediately, lest you be infected." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Clara's breath hitched in her throat. Even now, standing in the arms of the king, her father was trying to erase her existence. "A sick servant," Alexander repeated softly, the danger in his tone escalating. Suddenly, Clara shifted in his arms. The mate bond had been feeding her strength for the last 10 minutes, and the overwhelming scent of her family's deception ignited a spark deep within her chest. A latent power, suppressed by decades of poison, finally snapped its chains. "I am no servant," Clara's voice rang out. It wasn't the raspy, fearful whisper from the attic. It was a pure, commanding melody, carrying a strange, resonant frequency that made every wolf in the room stand perfectly still. "My name is Clara Montgomery. I am Richard and Victoria's eldest daughter." Pandemonium erupted. Murmurs of shock, disbelief, and outrage flooded the ballroom. "Liar!" Isabella shrieked, her face twisting into an ugly mask of pure jealousy and hatred. "We have no sister. You are a diseased rogue trying to steal the king's attention. Father, kill her." "Silence!" Alexander roared, a sound so deafening that the crystal chandeliers above them vibrated dangerously. He turned his glowing golden eyes toward a distinguished-looking man standing near the buffet tables. "Dr. Harris, you are the chief medical examiner for the Neutral Olympic Peninsula Pack. Step forward." An older wolf with silvering hair stepped out of the crowd, bowing deeply. "Yes, my king." "Tell this assembly what you smell," Alexander commanded, shifting his jacket slightly so Clara's arm was exposed. Dr. Harris approached cautiously, inhaling the air around Clara. His eyes widened in absolute horror. He looked up at Richard and Victoria with pure disgust. "My king, the scent is heavily masked, but the chemical signature is unmistakable. It is synthetic wolfsbane, mixed with extreme hormonal suppressants. It is a highly illegal, toxic concoction designed to brutally suppress a wolf's natural biology. From the saturation in her pores, she has been injected with it for years." The crowd erupted again, this time with furious snarls directed at the Montgomerys. Using wolfsbane on a pack member, let alone a child, was considered an unforgivable crime in their society. "She is an Omega," Alexander declared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "My mate, my queen. And you, Richard, locked her in a dark room and poisoned her for 20 years, simply because her blindness and her gentle nature did not fit your twisted, superficial political agenda." Richard fell to his knees, his aristocratic pride shattering under the weight of his absolute ruin. "My king, please, you don't understand the embarrassment. She was defective. The only defective things in this room are your souls," Alexander sneered. Isabella, completely blinded by a lifetime of entitlement and the sudden loss of her promised crown, lost her mind. With a feral shriek, she shifted mid-air, her bones cracking and reforming into a massive, sandy blonde wolf. She launched herself directly at Clara, intent on tearing the throat out of the sister who had just destroyed her life. "No!" Silas yelled, drawing his blades. But Alexander didn't move. He didn't need to. Clara, guided purely by the ancient, dormant instincts of her bloodline, turned her unseeing silver eyes toward the lunging beast. She didn't cower, she didn't scream. Instead, an explosive, blinding aura of pure silver light erupted from her delicate body. The suppressants had kept more than just her scent hidden. They had buried a genetic anomaly. She wasn't just an Omega. She was a white spirit Omega, a legendary lineage thought to be extinct for centuries, possessing the power to bend the will of any predator through sheer spiritual dominance. "Kneel," Clara commanded softly. The single word didn't hold physical volume, but it struck Isabella like a freight train. The massive sandy wolf was violently slammed down onto the polished marble, her chin hitting the floor with a sickening crack. She whimpered, her body paralyzed, completely subjugated by Clara's overwhelming, pacifying aura. Every alpha in the room, including Richard and Silas, instantly dropped to one knee, their heads bowed in involuntary reverence. Only Alexander remained standing, immune to his mate's command, staring at the woman in his arms with a mixture of absolute awe and profound devotion. The aftermath of the summit was swift, ruthless, and absolute. Alexander, operating with the terrifying efficiency of a sovereign betrayed, enacted his judgment right there on the ballroom floor. By the laws of their kind, Richard and Victoria Montgomery were stripped of their alpha sparks. A painful, agonizing ritual that physically tore the dominance from their souls. "You prized status and wealth above the life of your own flesh and blood," Alexander pronounced, looking down at the broken, trembling figures of Clara's parents. "Therefore, you shall have neither. Your estate, your assets, and your pack are hereby seized by the crown. You are banished from the Werewolf Society permanently." "Please, my king," Victoria sobbed, crawling forward and grasping at the hem of Alexander's trousers. "We have nowhere to go. We know nothing of the human world." "Then you will learn," Clara spoke up, her voice steady and lacking any pity. The years of abuse had burned away any filial loyalty she might have possessed. "You will learn what it means to be truly powerless." The hard karma was immediate and poetic in its justice. The once untouchable Montgomery alphas, who had worn Cartier diamonds and sipped vintage champagne, were loaded into the back of a rusted transport van. They were exiled to a remote, freezing fish processing plant in Dutch Harbor, Alaska, forced to live out their remaining human years working brutal, manual labor in a place that smelled permanently of rot and salt. Isabella, stripped of her rank and thoroughly humiliated, was sent with them, forced to scrub floors alongside the parents who had molded her into a monster. For Clara, the nightmare was finally over. Alexander took her far away from the oppressive, rainy gloom of Washington state. They traveled in a heavily armored Mercedes-Benz G-Class, through the treacherous mountain passes, arriving 2 days later at the royal estate in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It was a sprawling, magnificent fortress of glass and timber built into the side of a snow-capped mountain, bathed in brilliant, unfiltered sunlight. The first month was dedicated entirely to her healing. Alexander brought in Dr. Harrison, a renowned werewolf toxicologist who frequently consulted quietly with human specialists at the Harborview Medical Center in Seattle and Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. "The blindness wasn't genetic, Your Majesty," Dr. Harrison explained one evening in the royal study, looking over a stack of complex blood panels. The extreme doses of synthetic wolfsbane administered during her early childhood development severely stunted the optic nerves. It was essentially chemical trauma. Now that the toxins are flushing from her system and her omega healing factor is fully active, there is a significant chance the nerve pathways will regenerate. Alexander stood by the massive bay windows overlooking the valley, his hands clenched in his pockets. Do whatever it takes. Spare no expense. For Clara, the transition was overwhelming but beautiful. She no longer lived in a cold, silent box. Her days were filled with the scent of pine needles, roasting meats, and the constant, comforting presence of Alexander. He was a terrifying king to the rest of the world, but to her, he was endlessly patient. He read to her, he walked with her through the snowy gardens, and he held her through the painful nights when her body violently expelled the last remnants of the poison. Slowly, the darkness began to recede. It started as blurry shapes and shifting shadows. Then, muted colors, the bright crimson of a winter berry, the stark white of the snow. 6 months after she was rescued from the attic, Clara sat on the edge of the massive king-sized bed, her hands trembling as Dr. Harrison carefully snipped the final layer of medical bandages from her eyes. Alexander knelt before her, holding his breath. The bandages fell away. Clara blinked, the bright morning sunlight stinging her sensitive pupils. She squeezed her eyes shut, then slowly fluttered them open again. The world came into sharp, breathtaking focus. She looked down. Kneeling before her was a man of magnificent, rugged beauty. He had sharp, aristocratic features, dark, messy hair, and a faint, silver scar running down the side of his strong jaw. But it was his eyes that captivated her, a piercing, brilliant shade of icy blue that currently swam with unshed tears. "Alexander," she whispered, reaching out to trace the line of his jaw. She could finally map the face of the man who had saved her. He leaned into her palm, a rough sob escaping his chest as he kissed her fingertips. "I see you, Clara. I have always seen you." She smiled, her silver eyes shining with newfound clarity and immense power. She was no longer the hidden shame of a broken family. She was Clara Sterling, the white spirit Omega, and the absolute ruler of the Alpha King's heart. Clara's unseeing eyes eventually cleared, revealing the vibrant, beautiful world she now ruled. The Montgomerys, permanently stripped of their wealth and status, faded into miserable obscurity, a harsh karma for their cruelty. Beside her formidable Alpha King, the once hidden Omega flourished, proving that true power lies not in flawless genetics, but in an unbroken spirit. They ruled the North American territories with unmatched grace, their legendary love echoing through eternity.